Tony, I think we can both agree we've never seen anything like this. The United States refusing to sign a joint declaration with its closest allies, insulting the Canadian Prime Minister. But I want to get to the substance. Does Trump have a point that there is a systematic set of predatory practices that Europeans have enacted? In other words, have they taken advantage of America on trade?
You know, Fareed, he has a point on specific products and industries, but starting a trade war with our closest allies is not the way to make that point and to make it effectively. He's now started a race to the bottom. And far from retreating, our allies have threatened to retaliate. And if you are making pork or Harley Davidsons or orange juice or peanut butter in the United States, you're going to have a tariff slapped on your product by some of our closest partners. The Business Roundtable, some of the leading CEOs in our country, have said this is a profound mistake, that in terms of prices for consumers here in the U.S., our own ability to export, and economic growth, all endangered by a tariff war that the president started. And here's the irony. Overall, Fareed, in terms of tariffs, actually, the United States, the EU, Canada, we're very low, average under 2%. There's specific products that do get high tariffs, and the president's right, for example, about milk products being sold to Canada, just as the Canadians are upset that we slap about a 300% tariff on tobacco coming into the United States. There's a way to deal with it. Ironically, we did. The Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement that the president tore up actually resolved the milk issue with Canada. That would be the way to do it. Starting a war with your best friends, not the right way.
Right, and I think, Tony, it's important that people understand these trade deals are complex packages. You can always then point to one area where you feel you got shafted, but you got something else. For example, the United States sells its services everywhere, and often other countries resent the fact that we get that special treatment. So everyone's making some concessions in return for some reciprocal concessions on the other side.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's the tragedy of having thrown out the Trans-Pacific Partnership, given up on the agreement with Europe. There really was an opportunity to resolve some of these outstanding issues and for everyone to succeed, to have a win-win. Now we're heading back to a zero-sum world, and again with our closest partners.
Let me ask you about a specific charge President Trump also made, which struck me as an odd one. He said that if he had been president, he doesn't think Russia would have gotten away with annexing Crimea, invading Ukraine. You were, I think, Deputy Secretary of State at the time. So in effect, he's blaming Obama for the Russian annexation of Crimea. What's your response?
Well, that's the first play out of his playbook. When he gets into trouble on something, he blames someone else, including President Obama. Look, after the Russians annexed Crimea and then went into eastern Ukraine, President Obama led the world, pulling together a coalition, bringing the Europeans together on the toughest sanctions on Russia, beefing up NATO, including its presence right alongside NATO's border, working with Europeans on energy security to take away that weapon from Russia. Now, when President Trump talks about letting Russia back into the G8, it's extraordinary because since Ukraine, Fareed, they've doubled down on misbehavior, whether it was shooting down that civilian airliner over Ukraine, meddling, of course, in our own elections, poisoning dissidents abroad, exporting corruption every place. It's only gotten worse. They're not a responsible actor. They were originally, of course, brought into the G8 to make it a G8 on the premise that they would be a responsible actor. They were kicked out when they didn't become one, and now it's only gotten worse. The president basically, Fareed, is doing Putin's bidding for him. You know, we talk about collusion, whether there was collusion during the campaign. Mr. Mueller will figure that out. What worries me is that the collusion is now, whether intended or not, which is to say, whether it's tearing down our own institutions or tearing apart our alliances, President Trump is doing everything that Mr. Putin would want him to do.